I woke to the ticking of the clock, the antique alarm clock Eleanor had given me for our 25th anniversary. The house was silent. Ashton and Verity must still be upstairs asleep. That's the way it is on Saturdays. They're asleep, and I, old Lloyd Hudspeth, can't afford that luxury. My body, having lived 78 years, already decides when to get up. Creaking my knees, I sat up on the bed. My room, the former guest room on the ground floor, looked like an island of the past in a modernized house. Old photographs on the dresser, worn carpet, bookshelves with editions long gone. Since Eleanor's death 3 years ago, Verity had hinted that it would be nice to freshen up the interior, but I hadn't allowed it. It's the only corner where I still feel my wife's presence. Pulling on my robe, I shuffled into the kitchen. I turned on the coffee maker, the only modern appliance I was used to. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I looked out the window at the backyard. There had once been a bed of roses that Eleanor and I planted every spring. Now it was minimalist Japanese-style landscaping that Verity had commissioned from some fancy designer. No flowers, rocks, mosses, and a single bonsai that I'm pretty sure she doesn't know how to water properly. We bought this house with Eleanor 32 years ago, spent all our savings on a down payment. I just started my print shop, and the orders were pouring in. We were happy, a young family in our own home, with a business that promised a steady income. Ashton was 13 at the time, a difficult age. He'd never been an easy child, but we were coping. 3 years ago, when Eleanor passed away, I made the mistake of signing the house over to Ashton. "It'll be easier on the inheritance that way," he said. I agreed, but on the condition that I would live here for the rest of my life. The arrangement seemed fair. I didn't realize then that I was voluntarily giving up the last crumbs of power over my own life. A noise upstairs heralded the awakening of the younger generation. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the small table by the window. Soon Verity appeared in the kitchen, slim and trim, wearing a silk robe and impeccable makeup, despite the early hour. "Good morning, Lloyd," she nodded, heading for the coffee maker. Verity never called me Daddy, or at least Mr. Hudspeth, only by my first name, as if I were a lodger and not her husband's father. "Morning, Verity," I replied, sipping my coffee. She pulled some kind of green smoothie out of the refrigerator in a bottle. "I hope you weren't planning on cooking something in the kitchen today? I have a video conference with a client at 11, and the cooking smells might get in the way." Typical Verity, not even a question, but a statement couched in the form of a polite request. "I was going to make scrambled eggs, but I can do without," I shrugged. "Great," she nodded. "Also, could you keep the TV off in the living room tonight? The sound goes all over the first floor." I nodded silently. My morning news program could wait. After all, what new things could be happening in the world that I hadn't already seen in my long life? Verity worked as a PR specialist for a large company. At home, she often held video conferences with clients, turning our living room into a makeshift office. On such days, I tried to keep a low profile, so as not to inadvertently ruin her professional image. Half an hour later, Ashton came downstairs sleepy, in a t-shirt and shorts. Unlike his always packed wife, his son allowed himself to relax on weekends. "Hey, Dad," he said, heading for the coffee maker. Ashton worked as a financial analyst. Smart guy, always had been, but cold. Sometimes I thought he saw people as numbers in a spreadsheet, assets and liabilities. I guess he put me in the liabilities column a long time ago. "Good morning, son," I said. "How did you sleep?" "Fine." He plopped down on the chair across from me with a cup of coffee. "Listen, Dad, remind me, did you pay the water bill this month? Always like this. No, how's your health, or what are your plans?" Straight to the point. "Yeah, Tuesday. And the electric bill too." I sipped my coffee. "All the payments go automatically out of my account as usual." Ashton nodded, clearly satisfied with the answer. "Good. The Pattersons' neighbors had some kind of water supply problem during the week. That's how we communicated, in the language of household issues and finances. I continued to pay the mortgage and all the bills on the house, even though Ashton technically owned it. It was our unspoken agreement. I was paying for the right to live in my own house. Verity appeared in the doorway with the phone in her hand. "Ashton, we need to discuss the guest list," she said. "I have some ideas." Her son nodded, finished his coffee, and stood up. "Let's go to the study," he turned to me. "Dad, could you—" "I understand," I interrupted, standing up. "I won't disturb you." They left without even trying to explain what guest list they were talking about. I went back to my room, pulled a worn Agatha Christie detective book off the shelf, and settled into a chair. In recent years, I'd been rereading old books. The new plots no longer lingered in my memory. Toward lunchtime, I went into the kitchen to make a sandwich. As I passed the study, I heard muffled voices. I don't usually eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, I slowed down. Lloyd is definitely going to be a problem, Verity was saying. Did you see the way he acted at the last dinner party? He started telling the Henriksons about his printing business as if it were of interest to anyone. I know, Ashton sighed. But what do you suggest? It's his house, after all. Not technically, Verity said with steel in her voice. The house is yours, and we need to remember that. But he's paying for— I know what he's paying for, and that's why we tolerate him here. But this party is too important to us. Willis can offer you a partnership if it goes well. We can't risk it. I froze at the door, trying to breathe quietly. So they're planning some kind of important party, and I don't seem to be on the guest list. Okay, Ashton said finally. I'll talk to him. Why don't we send him to the Bairds for the weekend? He's friends with Thomas. Thomas Baird was an old friend of mine from my days as a printer. We did spend time together occasionally, but we'd rarely seen each other in the last year because his arthritis had worsened and he rarely left the house. No, it's too complicated to organize, Verity objected. Just tell him to go out for the evening. Maybe have dinner somewhere in town. Go to a movie. What do old people do at night? Verity, Ashton sounded annoyed. That's my father, don't say that. I'm sorry, darling, her tone softened. It's just that this party is so important to us, for our future. I quietly stepped away from the door and headed for the kitchen. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the bread for the sandwich. What do old people do there at night? In my 78, I felt like a real old man for the first time, not because of age, but because of attitude. To them, I was a burden, an inconvenient interior detail that had to be tolerated for financial reasons. After making a sandwich, I went back to my room. My appetite was gone. I sat in my chair, looking at the picture of Eleanor on my dresser. She would know what to do. She always knew how to smooth the edges between Ashton and me. What's an old man to do tonight? That question was swirling around in my head. It had been a long time since I'd thought about what I wanted to do myself. For the past 3 years, I just existed out of inertia, paying the bills and trying to stay out of the young couple's way. But now something inside me has awakened. Maybe pride, maybe anger, or maybe just fatigue from being invisible in my own home. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, a rare occasion when we ate together, Ashton cleared his throat. Dad, Verity and I have a little event next Friday, a dinner party with our coworkers. I nodded, pretending this was the first time I'd heard of it. I see. Will I have to go somewhere? Ashton and Verity exchanged glances. That would be fine, the son began cautiously. It's a business meeting and I'll be redundant, I finished for him. Don't worry, I'll find something to do. Thank you for understanding, Lloyd, Verity smiled. It's very important for Ashton's career. I nodded, continuing to eat. Inside, resentment slowly boiled up, but I didn't let it show. Let them think it was so easy to get an old man out the door. Let them think I'd accept another humiliation without complaint. But this time it would be different. I didn't know how, but I felt it was time to remind my son and daughter-in-law who still had their hand on the financial pulse of this house. The next morning, I decided to change tactics. Years had taught me that sometimes the best way to fight is to pretend to be an ally. After overhearing the conversation, the resentment hadn't subsided, but I decided to act wisely. Instead of taking offense in the corner, I'll show that I can be helpful. Perhaps that would make them consider me at least a little. I got up earlier than usual so I could make breakfast before Ashton and Verity came downstairs. Scrambled eggs with vegetables, freshly brewed coffee, even the orange juice I squeezed myself, just like the old days when Eleanor was alive and we had breakfast as a family. Verity came down first, already dressed for her weekend yoga class. When she saw the table set, she froze on the threshold of the kitchen. Lloyd, what's this? Breakfast, I smiled, pouring coffee into cups. I thought I'd make you happy on Sunday. She sat down cautiously at the table, as if afraid of a catch. That's nice of you. I noticed her eyeing the omelet, probably calculating the calorie count. Verity was always watching her figure with an obsession that seemed unhealthy to me. Is Ashton still asleep? I asked, sitting down across from her. Taking a shower, she took a small sip of coffee. Should be downstairs any minute. We sat in awkward silence. Before, I wouldn't have noticed the awkwardness, would have taken it for granted. But now, after overhearing the conversation, every pause seemed like an accusation. "I hear you're planning a party," I finally said. "Sounds interesting." Verity tensed slightly. "Yeah, a small business event. It's nothing fancy." "For Ashton's career, I understand." I nodded. "Is there anything I can do to help?" After all, I'd hosted receptions in this house when you and Ashton weren't married. She set her fork down without touching the omelet. "Thank you, Lloyd, but we can handle it. I have experience organizing corporate events, and I've got it under control." "Sure," I shrugged. "I just thought I could be helpful. I have some connections from my business days. For example, Raymond Pierce of Silver Tray Catering Service is an old client of mine. They used to make wonderful hors d'oeuvres for our corporate soirees." Verity's eyes flashed with interest. "Silver Tray? They're in high demand right now. They have bookings for months in advance." I felt a faint surge of satisfaction. I'd finally got her attention. "Yeah, Ray's proud of his success. We printed their first menus and business cards when he first started." Ashton entered the kitchen, buttoning his shirt as he walked. "Good morning," he stammered when he saw the table set. "Wow, what's the occasion?" "Your father decided to treat us to breakfast," Verity said, and I noticed that her tone was warmer. "And by the way, he has connections at the Silver Tray." Ashton whistled as he set his omelet down. "Seriously, Dad? You know someone there?" "Raymond Pierce, the owner." I couldn't hide the pride in my voice. "He was one of my first customers when he opened the restaurant." "That might be helpful." Ashton glanced over at his wife. "We were just discussing catering for Friday. I tried to build on the success. I might give him a call today. I think he'll find room in the schedule for you." "That would be great," Verity nodded, and I noticed the change in her attitude. Suddenly, I was a valuable resource, not a burden. Over breakfast, we discussed the details of the upcoming party. Ashton told me he was expecting 15 guests, mostly colleagues from the firm and an important client, Warren Willis, the head of an investment firm who could offer Ashton a partnership. "He's very picky about details," the son explained. "At the last meeting, he noticed that my cufflinks didn't match the shade of my suit." "Sounds like an old school man," I remarked. "In my day, details like that mattered too." Ashton nodded, clearly absorbed in his own thoughts. "Dad, could you help with the wine some more? You always had good taste." "Sure." I felt my heart grow warm at that small praise. I still had contacts at the liquor store on Maple Street. After breakfast, which passed in an unexpectedly warm atmosphere, I called Raymond. He was delighted to hear from me. We hadn't spoken in over a year. "Lloyd Hudsperson, what are you doing here? How's your health?" "Not bad for my age, Ray," I said. "Listen, I need a favor. My son is having an important business dinner on Friday, and he needs a good catering service." "Friday?" Raymond whistled. "Lloyd, I'm booked weeks in advance." I realize that, but this is very important to Ashton's career, and I would take it as a personal favor. "Remember when I gave you an extension when you first started?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "Okay, Lloyd, for you. How many guests and what's the budget?" I named the numbers we'd discussed with Ashton, and Raymond promised to call back with a menu. When I broke the good news to my son and daughter-in-law, their faces brightened. "Awesome, Dad!" Ashton clapped me on the shoulder. "I knew I could count on you." In that moment, I almost believed that our relationship could work, that my son still needed me, and not just as a source of funding. For the next few days, I took an active role in the party preparations. I helped select the wines, suggested furniture arrangements, even retrieved from the garage the antique silver tray that Eleanor and I had received as a wedding present. Ashton and Verity accepted my help, though I noticed their enthusiasm gradually fading. On Wednesday evening, as we were discussing the details of the reunion, Verity suddenly interrupted me half-heartedly. "Lloyd, this is very interesting, but perhaps we should leave some things to our discretion. Modern business meetings are different than they were in your day, after all." "Of course," I stepped back, feeling that familiar feeling of irrelevance returning. "I just wanted to help." "And you did," Ashton interjected. "The catering, the wine, that's a great contribution." But Verity and I had already thought of the rest. I nodded and left the living room, where they continued the discussion without me. Back in my room, I sat down in my chair and thought about it. It seemed my usefulness was severely limited. They accepted my help as long as it conformed to their perceptions. As soon as I took the initiative, I became a nuisance. Thursday morning at breakfast, Verity announced that a decorator was coming today to get the house ready for the event. It would be great if you could stay out of the common areas while he works, she added with a smile that didn't affect her eyes, so as not to interfere with the creative process. I could help, I offered. After all, this is my house, and I know every corner of it. That's a nice offer, Lloyd, Verity said. But Bradley has his own vision. He's the best decorator in town. I felt the resentment rising in me again. Technically, the house belonged to Ashton, but in fact, I was still paying for it, and I was being asked to stay out of the way like I was an occasional guest. Okay, I got up from the table. I'll go into town and visit Thomas. Good idea, Dad, Ashton nodded, keeping his eyes on his tablet. Tell him I said hi. I spent the day with Thomas Baird, an old friend of mine who now lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Cedar City. His arthritis had progressed and he rarely left the house, so he was glad to have my visit. We reminisced about old times, discussed contemporary politics, and watched baseball on TV. A normal day for two old men who were slowly being written off by the world. How are things with Ashton? Thomas asked as we drank tea on the veranda. Difficult, I sighed. They're having an important party tomorrow, and I've been asked to disappear for the evening, of course. Thomas shook his head. Young people. They think they know better than we do. We used to think the same about our old people. The difference is that I still pay for the house my son and his wife live in. I still feel unwelcome. Why do you keep paying? Thomas frowned. The house is in his name. Let him pay for it. I shrugged. Habit, I guess. Besides, what else am I supposed to do with the money? I'd been saving all my life, and the printing business was bringing in a good income. I can't spend it all at my age. You could travel, Thomas suggested, or move to Florida like normal old people. We both laughed, but there was a bitter truth behind it. I really didn't know what to do with my life. After Eleanor's death, it was as if I had lost my direction, and my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law made it hard for me to feel needed, even in my own home. When I returned home in the evening, I found the living room completely transformed. There were new cushions on the couch, stylish arrangements of flowers. Even the paintings on the walls were different. My favorite landscapes were removed, replacing them with abstract paintings. You like it? Verity appeared from the kitchen, where she was checking out the serving dishes the decorator had brought in. Bradley had outdone himself. Very modern, I replied cautiously. Where's my painting of the mountain lake? We put it away for a while, she said with a wave of her hand. It didn't fit the concept. I didn't say anything. What else could I say? It wasn't my house anymore, even though I was still paying for it. At that moment, Ashton walked in, talking on the phone. His face was tense. Yes, Mr. Willis, of course. Yes, we've taken your preferences into account. No, just a red wine from Bordeaux, just the way you like it. He noticed me and nodded, continuing the conversation. I headed for my room, but I heard the end of the conversation. Yes, I'm sure you'll be comfortable. No distractions. Yes, a family environment, but in the best way possible. Closing the bedroom door behind me, I sat down on the bed. No distractions was obviously about me. I was a distraction in my own home. Friday morning, the house turned into a war zone. Verity ran between the kitchen and living room, checking every detail. Ashton was nervous, changed his shirt twice, asked my opinion on my tie, only to ignore it and choose a different one. Willis is very important to us, Dad, he explained when we were alone in the kitchen for a second. If he offers me a partnership, our lives will change. We'll be able to move to a bigger house, maybe even to that neighborhood in the hills that Verity had always dreamed of. I nodded, thinking that for them, this house full of mine and Eleanor's memories was just a stepping stone to something better. At lunchtime, the team from Silver Tray arrived. Raymond personally came to greet me. Lloyd, old friend, he gave me a hug. You haven't changed a bit. Lying and not blushing, I grinned. But thanks for the compliment. Raymond introduced me to his sous chef and the team of waiters who would cater the party. We'll cook everything on site, he explained. Fresh is always better. As the team set up in the kitchen, I noticed Verity glancing nervously in my direction. Finally, she came over to me. Lloyd, could you? She hesitated. Anyway, tonight. I know, I nodded. I'm not supposed to be home. Don't worry, I've already made dinner plans with Thomas. She visibly relaxed. Thanks for understanding, and for helping with the catering, of course. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Ashton, who was passing by, cast a surprised glance at his watch. It was too early for guests. He opened the door and I heard a deep, commanding voice. Ashton Hudspeth, I hope I'm not too early. I like to arrive early to assess the situation. Mr. Willis. Ashton sounded surprised, mixed with panic. No, you're just in time. Please come in. A tall, gray-haired man in an impeccable suit entered the hallway. Warren Willis looked exactly as I'd imagined him to look, a polished, self-assured man accustomed to command. He glanced around the living room, nodded slightly, clearly approving of what he saw, and then noticed me. And this? He looked questioningly at Ashton. This is my father, Lloyd Hudspeth, Ashton introduced me, and I noticed the slight nervousness in his voice. Dad, this is Mr. Warren Willis. I extended my hand, which Willis shook firmly. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hudspeth. His keen gaze slid over my face appraisingly. Ashton mentioned that you were a former businessman? Yeah, I used to own a print shop, I answered. 35 years before I retired. A print shop? Interesting. Willis nodded with a respect I hadn't seen in my son's eyes in a long time. Small business is the backbone of the economy. I started out as a small consulting agency before expanding into an investment firm. My father taught me a lot about business, Ashton said suddenly, and I could barely contain my surprise. It was probably the first sincere praise I'd heard from him in years. Verity appeared beside me, as if materializing out of thin air. Mr. Willis, may I offer you a drink? We have a fine scotch, 18 years old. With pleasure. Willis nodded, then turned back to me. Mr. Hudspeth, I hope you'll join us tonight. It's always interesting to talk to someone who's built a business from the ground up. I opened my mouth but didn't have time to respond. Actually, Ashton interjected, my father has other plans for tonight. A reunion with some old friends, right, Dad? His gaze was almost pleading. I took the hint and nodded. Yeah, unfortunately, it's a long-standing arrangement, so I can't cancel. Too bad. Willis looked genuinely disappointed. Maybe some other time. Verity led Willis into the living room, and Ashton lingered with me in the hallway. Dad, he said quietly but insistently, I know we agreed you wouldn't be home, but if Mr. Willis wants you to stay... I thought you didn't want me at the party, I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. Distraction, remember? Ashton wrinkled his nose. That's not what I meant. It's just, the party's business. You'd be bored. And now suddenly your boss is interested in me? He's not a boss, he's a potential partner. Ashton glanced nervously around the living room. Look, do what you want. If you want to stay, stay. But, he hesitated. But what? Just be careful what you talk about. No political discussions or stories about how things were better in your day. I felt a wave of anger rising in me. It's too late for me to change at my age, Ashton. I am who I am. Dad, please. His voice sounded almost desperate. This is a very important night for me. I stared at my son, trying to see in this intense, calculating man the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike, the one who cried when he smashed his knees and laughed when I tossed him in the air. Verity's voice came from the living room. Ashton, Mr. Willis is asking about your analysis of the Asian markets. I'm coming, Ashton shouted, and then turned back to me. Dad, it's up to you, but if you stay... I get it, I interrupted him. I want you to keep a low profile. Don't embarrass my successful son. Ashton looked guilty, but only for a second. Then he nodded and hurried into the living room with Willis. I went up to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. Willis's invitation was unexpected, but at the same time, it didn't change anything. Ashton still saw me as a potential liability, something to ruin his carefully constructed image. Years of humiliation and neglect couldn't be undone by one casual interest from an important person. I pulled my best jacket out of the closet, old-fashioned but still elegant. Putting it on, I looked at myself in the mirror. Age had left its traces, wrinkles, gray hair, a slouch that I couldn't straighten. But there was still life in my eyes, and a dignity that no one could take away from me. The decision came naturally. I would go down and join the party, not for Ashton's sake, or even Willis's curiosity, but for my own. To remind everyone, including myself, that I still exist, that this is my house that I'm paying for, and that I can't just be relegated to the back of the house like a piece of junk. When I came downstairs, the house was already buzzing. The first guests had arrived, waiters were serving drinks and appetizers, and background music was playing. I saw Ashton talking animatedly with a group of men in suits. Willis stood nearby, listening intently. I headed toward them, but I was intercepted by Verity. Her smile didn't affect her eyes. "Lloyd, I thought you left already," panic sounded in her voice. "Mr. Willis has expressed a desire to talk to me," I replied calmly. "It would be rude to refuse." "Of course, but—" She looked back at the group of men. "Maybe a little later? They're just discussing an important project." "I'll wait," I nodded. "Why don't you introduce me to the other guests?" Verity was clearly nervous. Her perfectly planned evening wasn't going as planned. "Okay, let's go." She took my arm and led me over to a group of women who appeared to be the wives of Ashton's co-workers. "Ladies, meet Lloyd, Ashton's father." The women smiled politely and introduced themselves. I joined their conversation, which revolved around the latest trends in interior design. The topic was completely uninteresting to me, but I kept the conversation going, occasionally glancing over at Ashton and his group. After a while, I noticed Ashton looking around anxiously, looking for someone. Noticing me with the women, he visibly relaxed, but when our gazes met, I saw a warning in his eyes. The party continued. I moved from group to group, exchanging polite phrases with the guests. No one was particularly interested in me, but there was no outright dislike either. I was just the host's old father, a harmless detail of the interior. Willis found me as I stood at the window, watching the guests. "Mr. Hudspert, I'm glad you decided to join us after all." He handed me a glass of whiskey. "Your son told me about your print shop. Impressive." I didn't think Ashton remembered it. I accepted the glass. He'd never taken much interest in my business. Willis grinned. "Kids rarely appreciate what their parents build, until they get older." He took a sip of whiskey. "I'm trying to hand the reins over to my son now myself, but he still thinks he knows better. Typical youthful arrogance." We got to talking. Willis turned out to be an interesting conversationalist, with a sharp mind and an unexpected sense of humor. We discussed changes in the business climate, recalled the economic crises we had experienced, and compared management approaches. I felt alive again, significant. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed how nervous Ashton was to see our conversation dragging on. He tried to cut in a few times, but Willis seemed genuinely engrossed in our conversation. When I told the story of how I had saved the print shop during the recession of 2008 by shifting the business to digital printing of small runs, Willis nodded approvingly. Adaptability is a key quality of a successful entrepreneur. Your son seems to have inherited this trait. His analysis of Asian markets shows a similar flexibility of thought. I didn't say anything. It would have been hypocritical to accept praise for a son I had seen very differently lately. But I didn't want to refute the words of Ashton's potential partner. Our conversation was interrupted by the clinking of glasses as Verity called for dinner. Willis apologized and retreated to the main table. I noticed that no place had been prepared for me. Of course, I wasn't expected at dinner. Ashton approached me as the guests were seated. "Dad," his voice was strained, "you had a great talk with Willis and he's obviously impressed. But now the business part of the dinner begins. And I should just disappear?" I finished for him. "Don't say that," Ashton grimaced. "It's just, you realize we didn't plan for you to stay, and there's no room at the table." "I understand," I nodded. "Don't worry, I won't get in the way. I'll go to my room." Ashton looked relieved. "Thanks, Dad. Really. We'll talk about it tomorrow, okay?" I nodded silently and headed for the stairs. Verity intercepted me on the way. "Lloyd," her smile was strained. "Look, we really appreciate you helping with the organization, we really do. But now the important part of the evening begins." "Yeah, Ashton already explained," I sighed. "Don't worry, I'm off to my room." "Actually," Verity hesitated, "it would be better if you weren't home at all. You see, after dinner we plan to move on to the project presentation. Ashton will be using the projector in the living room, and your room—" "My room's too close so I can hear something?" I wasn't hiding my sarcasm. "It's not that," she shook her head. "It's just that it'll be noisy, with guests moving all over the first floor. You'll be uncomfortable yourself." I looked at this woman who was so cleverly trying to get me out of my own house, and I could feel the anger building up inside me. "You know, Verity, I lived in this house for 30 years before you and Ashton got married, and I'm still paying for it, even though legally it belongs to my son. So I guess I'll stay." Her face changed. The mask of politeness fell away. "Look, Lloyd," her voice became hard. "It's not a request. Ashton's future is being decided today. Our future. If he gets the partnership, we can finally move on, buy our own house, and you'll be free to do whatever you want with your money." At this point, Ashton came over to us. noticing the conversation was dragging on. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking from me to his wife. "Your father refuses to leave," Verity snarled. Ashton looked upset. "Dad, please, we discussed this." "We discussed that I wouldn't be at the dinner," I replied. "But kicking me out of the house is too much." "No one's kicking you out." Ashton lowered his voice, glancing around at the guests. "Just get away for a while. Go to a movie, have dinner somewhere. Come back when it's over." "And if I say no?" His face contorted with anger and despair. "Jesus, Dad, is it so hard to do this for me? You'll embarrass me if you stay. Get lost, please." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Just a few minutes ago, I felt like a respectable man talking to Willis. Now I was a nobody again, a liability, a source of potential embarrassment. "Okay," I squared my shoulders, trying to keep my dignity. "I'll leave. But remember this conversation, Ashton." I headed toward my room to grab my jacket and wallet. Verity followed me. "Lloyd," her voice was calmer now, "don't take it personally. This isn't about you, it's about—" "I get it, Verity," I interrupted her. "It's about business, isn't it? It's always about money and status." I grabbed my jacket and headed out. As I passed the dining room, I noticed Willis looking at me. Our eyes met, and I nodded briefly goodbye. He looked surprised. At the front door, I was intercepted by Verity again. "Just so we're clear," she said, lowering her voice. "Don't be here until midnight tonight, okay? Everyone should be gone by then." I stared at her in silence, feeling the cold rage building up inside me. "Verity, step away from the door." She didn't move. "Promise me you won't be back before midnight." "I promise," I hissed. "Now let me go." She didn't move away, clearly not trusting my promise. I took a step forward and Verity literally pushed me out the door, slamming it behind me. I stood on the porch of my own house, kicked out like an unwanted guest. Through the windows I saw silhouettes of people, heard muffled laughter and the clinking of glasses. Life went on without me. Slowly descending the steps, I walked away from the house. It was still light, but it was getting evening. The October air was cool, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. There was nowhere in particular to go. Thomas was busy today. His daughter was visiting from Portland with his grandchildren. I headed downtown to Jenny's Cafe, a small family-run establishment where I'd often dined in recent years. Jenny, a full-figured woman in her 50s, greeted me with a smile. "Mr. Hudspert, haven't seen you in a while. The usual?" "Yes, Jenny." I sat down at my favorite table by the window. "Coffee and apple pie." While she was preparing the order, I pulled out my phone. The screen showed a few missed calls from Ashton before our conflict, apparently looking for me around the house. Now the phone was silent. I turned the sound off and tucked it into my pocket. The cafe was almost empty a Friday night, most people either at home with their families or in bars and restaurants. Just a couple of older men at the counter and a young woman with a laptop in the corner. Jenny brought coffee and pie. "Everything all right, Mr. Hudspert? You seem upset." "It's fine, Jenny," I tried to smile. "It's just a family thing." She nodded understandingly and went back behind the counter. I sat there, slowly sipping my coffee and reflecting on my life. About the years I'd spent working to provide for my family. About the decision to sign the house over to Ashton after Eleanor died. About gradually slipping into the role of an unwanted lodger in his own home. What would Eleanor say if she saw how her son treated his father? She'd always been gentler than me, always defending Ashton, finding excuses for his selfishness. "He's just ambitious, Lloyd," she used to say. "He wants more than we could afford." But now, I was sure even she couldn't make excuses for him. I finished my coffee and ordered another. Time stretched agonizingly slow. I watched the lights change outside the window, the streetlights turn on, the passers-by hurrying about their business. The usual Friday night hustle and bustle of Cedar City, a life I seemed to have no place in. At some point, I pulled out my cell phone. The screen showed 12 missed calls from Ashton. So he was looking for me after all. Maybe Willis was asking about me again. Or maybe something had gone wrong at the party. Whatever the case, I didn't call back. Instead, I opened the banking app. All the bills were in my name. The mortgage, the utility bills, and even the subscriptions to the streaming services Ashton and Verity used. I regularly paid everything automatically without thinking about it, silently financing the lives of the people who had just kicked me out the door. The solution came naturally. I canceled all automatic payments. Then I blocked the credit cards Ashton had access to as an additional holder. Finally, I transferred a significant amount of money from my main account to a new account I had just created. Now they would have no access to my money. Having completed all the transactions, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I had done something for myself, not for my son or daughter-in-law. I had regained control, however small, over my own life. The phone vibrated again. This time it was Verity calling. I dropped the call, then another from Ashton. I dropped it again, and then I just turned the phone off. Let them have fun at their party. Let them make plans for a future partnership and a new home. Let them enjoy the moment, and I'll enjoy my little act of retribution. Leaving Jenny's cafe, I wandered aimlessly through the evening streets of Cedar City. The chilly wind was chilling me to the bone, but I didn't care. There was a fire raging inside that no amount of fall chill could extinguish. At 10 p.m., I realized I needed a place to sleep. I wasn't going home before midnight, and I didn't want to see Ashton and Verity after either. I needed space, time to think. The Blue Pine Motel was on the way out of town, a small 2-story building with a neon sign and tattered curtains on the windows. Not a 5-star hotel, but clean and cheap. I got a room on the 2nd floor overlooking the parking lot. "How long are you staying?" I asked the receptionist, a half-asleep guy in his 20s with his hair sticking out in all directions. "I don't know yet," I answered, holding out my credit card. "Maybe a day, maybe a week." The guy shrugged, clearly not interested in my problems. "Whatever you say, mister." "Number 15, 2nd floor, left down the hall." The room was exactly as I expected. A bed, a nightstand, an old TV, a worn armchair by the window, a small bathroom. But the main thing was clean and quiet. No one was staring at me. No one was demanding that I disappear. No one was pushing me out of my own space. I sat down in the chair and turned on my phone. A flood of notifications broke into the silence of the room. 43 missed calls from Ashton, 21 from Verity, 7 voicemail messages, and dozens of text messages. I didn't read or listen to any of them, just watched the numbers grow on the screen. 3 more calls from Ashton came in while I was holding the phone. I turned the sound off but didn't turn the device off again. Let them see I was online. Let them agonize. Turning on the TV, I found an old Western with Clint Eastwood. Eleanor and I used to love movies like that back in the day. She'd always laughed at my love of tales of just retribution, called me my cowboy. Now, looking at the silent but continuously illuminated phone, I felt a little like a vigilante from the Wild West. An old man who had been underestimated strikes back. Around 11 at night, I showered and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was spinning with thoughts of home, of my son, of a life that had gone down the wrong path. Where had I gone wrong? When had Ashton turned into a man capable of kicking his father out the door for career gain? Was he always like this and I just didn't notice, blinded by my father's love? The phone kept vibrating on the nightstand like a persistent insect. At midnight, I couldn't stand it and glanced at the screen. 78 missed calls from Ashton, 32 from Verity, and a new name on the list, Warren Willis. 3 calls. That was unexpected. Why would Ashton's potential business partner call me? The party was supposed to be over, and he was apparently trying to contact me for some reason. Maybe Ashton had given him my number, but why? Curiosity took over, and I listened to the voicemail from Willis. "Mr. Hudspert, this is Warren Willis. I apologize for the late call. I wanted to apologize if I somehow contributed to your leaving the party. I was really interested in talking to you more about your business experience. If it's convenient for you, please call me back tomorrow. Have a good evening." The voice sounded sincere, without the falseness I was used to hearing from Ashton's business associates. Willis seemed genuinely eager to socialize. In another situation, I probably would have called him back. But right now, I wasn't interested in small talk. I muted the phone and tried to go to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. At 2 in the morning, I turned on the TV again, found the 24-hour news channel, and watched reports of events happening somewhere far away from my problems. By 4 in the morning, the number of missed calls from Ashton had reached 143. Verity had called 56 times. I wondered exactly what had happened after I left and blocked the accounts. Judging by the number of calls, something serious. At 6 in the morning, I finally fell asleep, exhausted from a sleepless night and emotional strain. I awoke to a knock on the door. I sat up abruptly on the bed, disoriented and not immediately realizing where I was. The clock read 10 in the morning. "Who's there?" I asked in a voice hoarse from sleep. "The maid, sir. Just checking to see if it needs cleaning." "No, thank you," I replied. "I'm not leaving yet." The footsteps drifted away and I leaned back against the pillow, trying to collect my thoughts. The phone on the nightstand showed 164 missed calls. I got up, washed my face with cold water, and decided it was time for breakfast. The motel had a small dining room that served a simple breakfast. I ordered scrambled eggs and bacon and coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the parking lot where a few truckers were loading things into their trucks. At a neighboring table sat a family with 2 children, a boy about 10 years old and a younger girl. The kids were making noise, the parents were patiently exhorting them, and the whole scene was so domestic, so normal, that I felt a prick of envy. Once upon a time, I had a family too. Ashton had been that kid once too, and Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast together like that at roadside cafes during our rare vacations. Back in the room, I decided it was time to read at least some of the messages. The first few were relatively quiet. "Dad, where are you? Willis was asking about you. Please call me as soon as you can. I hope you're not too upset. We'll talk when you get back." Then the tone of the messages began to change. "Dad, what happened to the card? It got declined at the restaurant. Call me back now. What did you do to the bill?" The last message was sent at 3 in the morning. "Dad, I know you're angry, and you have a right to be, but please let's talk. This is crossing all lines." I grinned. Crosses all boundaries was a rich statement from a man who'd kicked his own father out of the house. The phone rang in my hands and I saw Ashton's name on the screen. After a second's hesitation, I decided to answer it. It was time to hear what he had to say. "Yeah, Dad, finally." Ashton sounded exhausted. "Where are you? We're freaking out." "I'm in a safe place," I answered calmly. "What do you want, Ashton?" "What do I—" He hesitated. "Dad, you've blocked all the accounts. The cards don't work. The payments are canceled. We couldn't pay the restaurant last night. It was a nightmare." "It's a bad situation," I agreed, showing no sympathy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You did it on purpose." Ashton's voice grew quieter. "Because of last night. You're a smart one." "Dad, listen," he said quickly, clearly nervous. "I know you're upset. We didn't behave in the best way. But it's something we can talk about. Unlock the accounts, come home, and we'll work this out like adults." "Like adults?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Ashton, grown-ups don't push their parents out of the house like unwanted guests. Grown-ups don't tell their father, 'You're embarrassing me, get lost.'" I overreacted. He sounded remorseful, but I knew my son. He knew how to be persuasive when it was to his advantage. The party was important, and I was nervous. "And how was your big party? Did Willis offer you a partnership?" Ashton was silent for a few seconds. "No, he said he'd think about it. And then he asked about you. He asked a lot. It was unexpected. I remembered that Willis had called me, but I hadn't realized that my absence might have had any effect on his decision." "I'm sorry," I said, though I didn't really feel anything like that. "Dad," Ashton's voice became pleading, "please, let's work this out. I understand you're angry and you have a right to be, but blocking the accounts, it's too much. We've got mortgage payments next week, utilities." "You're right," I interrupted him. "All those payments are coming due. Payments for a house that's legally yours but actually paid for by me. A house I've been kicked out of like an annoying vagrant." "It was just one night," Ashton exclaimed. "One night, Dad, and you're making such a drama out of it." "Drama?" I felt my anger boiling up again. "Ashton, do you realize what you've done? You humiliated me. You and your wife treated me like a burden, put up with me just for the money. And when I became an inconvenience, you kicked me out the door." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." I raised my voice. "I heard you talking to Verity. What do old people do there at night? Remember? To you, I'm just an old man who gets in the way but pays the bills." There was silence on the line. I could hear Ashton's heavy breathing, imagining him sitting in the living room, the same one where they'd had their party last night, trying to figure out what to say to convince me to unlock the money. "Okay," he finally said. "Let's say we behaved inappropriately, but you can't just cut us off financially. That's blackmail." "No, Ashton," I said calmly, finding my anger giving way to a strange peace. "It's my money. I decide what I spend it on. And right now, I'm choosing not to spend it on people who don't respect me." "What do you want?" His voice sounded strained. "What do you want? That's a good question. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted. Go home and pretend it never happened. Continue living in this toxic atmosphere. Or cut all ties. Take my money and start a new life at 78. "I want respect," I finally answered. "Not gratitude for money, not fake care. but real respect, as a human being, like your father. You have my respect, Dad. Ashton's voice softened. I always have. No, I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. If I did, you wouldn't have kicked me out of the house for a party. I already said I regretted it. Sorry because I blocked the money, I interrupted. And if you hadn't, you'd think your behavior was okay. That's the problem, Ashton. He didn't answer, and I realized I was right. Listen, I continued after a pause. I need time. Time to think about what I want next. And you might want to think about how we got to this situation, too. Dad, please. I could hear the desperation in his voice. At least unblock the accounts. We can't even pay for groceries. You have a job, Ashton, I reminded him. Verity does too. You both make good money. You'll manage. But the mortgage can wait a week or two, I cut him off. Or you could start paying it yourself. After all, the house is yours. You can't do that, Ashton's voice became angry. After all we've done for you, we let you live with us. Let you? I couldn't believe my ears. Let me live in my own house that I bought 30 years before you got married, that I'm still paying for? Technically, it's my house, Ashton repeated stubbornly. You signed it over to me. Yes, I did, but with the understanding that it would be my home for the rest of my life, not a place to kick me out of when I become a liability to your career. Silence again. I could hear Verity's voice in the background, asking Ashton something. Just tell me when you'll be back, Ashton finally said. We need to talk in person. I don't know, I answered honestly. I need to think about it. At least tell me where you are. The irritation was back in his voice. Are you in town? At Thomas's? At the hotel? I'm in a safe place, I repeated. The rest doesn't matter. It does. You're an elderly man. You're alone. We're worried. Worried about when the accounts will be unblocked, I corrected him. Not about me. It's not fair, Dad. Ashton lowered his voice. We're really worried. Verity's been crying all night. I almost laughed. Verity crying over my absence? That would be a first. I'll call you later, I said, feeling tired from the conversation. I have to go. Dad, wait! His voice sounded almost frightened. At least tell me you're okay. I'm fine, Ashton, I answered. For the first time in a long time. I dropped the call and leaned back against the pillow, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and satisfaction. I'd finally told my son what I'd wanted to say for a long time. I'd finally stopped pretending everything was okay when in fact everything was very, very wrong. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer it. Then it rang again and again. Ashton was persistent, a quality he'd inherited from me. But right now, I didn't want to talk anymore. I really needed time to decide what to do next. I turned off my phone, put on my jacket, and left the room. I needed fresh air and time to think. Time to decide if it was worth it to return to a house that no longer felt like my own. I spent 2 more nights at the Blue Pine Motel. 2 nights of reflection, doubt, and an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I made decisions thinking only of myself and not how they would affect Ashton and his plans. Ashton called regularly. I sometimes answered, more often not. Our conversations were short and tense. He vacillated between apologizing and blaming, as if he couldn't decide which tactic would work best. Verity tried to contact me too, leaving messages asking me to come home and discuss the situation. By the morning of the 3rd day, I decided it was time to put an end to this situation. I couldn't live in a motel forever, and I had formed a clear idea of what I wanted to do next. After paying for the room, I hailed a cab and gave my home address. The driver, an older man about my age, looked at me with interest. To visit or to go home? He asked, pulling out of the cab. Good question, I grinned. Technically home, but I feel like a guest. He nodded understandingly, clearly not wanting to get into the details of someone else's life. We drove in silence, and I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Cedar City. The city I'd lived most of my life in suddenly seemed foreign to me. Or maybe I was the one who had become a stranger to it, an old man who had lost his place in a world that was rapidly changing. When the cab stopped in front of my house, I hesitated for a second. What awaited me inside? A confrontation? A fake apology? Or worse, indifference? Everything okay, mister? The driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. Yeah, I paid and got out of the car. It's just that coming home is sometimes harder than leaving. Ashton opened the door. He looked exhausted, a wrinkled shirt, stubble on his cheeks, eyes red from sleep. When he saw me, He froze for a moment, then stepped back, letting me into the house. "You're back," his voice sounded relieved. We'd been worried. I walked silently into the hallway, took off my jacket, and looked around. The house looked different. There were still traces of the party. The shifting furniture in the living room, the scarf someone had left on the coat rack, the slight smell of cigars that Ashton usually couldn't stand, but probably tolerated for Willis's sake. But there was something else, an atmosphere of tension, as if the walls had absorbed all the conflicts of the last few days. "Where have you been?" Ashton asked, following me into the living room. "At the motel." I sat down in my chair, the same one I'd been trying to push out of for the past few years. I needed to think. "You could have thought about it at home," he said, a flicker of irritation in his voice. "No, I couldn't." I looked him in the eye. "Not in the house I'd been kicked out of." Ashton lowered his gaze. "Dad, I already apologized for that. We overreacted." "Where's Verity?" I asked, not wanting to get right back into the old argument. "At work. She had to put in extra hours." I nodded understandingly. The financial pressure was starting to take its toll. "How was your weekend?" Ashton grimaced. "How do you think? No access to accounts after a failed party. Not the best weekend of my life." "The party was a flop?" I gave myself a little smile. "I thought I left on time." "Not funny, Dad." Ashton sank down on the couch across from me. "Willis was, disappointed that you left. He'd been asking about you all night, about your business. I think he was impressed with you. That was unexpected." I remembered the 3 calls from Willis and the message he left. Apparently his interest was genuine. "I'm sorry," I said, and this time I really meant it. "But you were the one who insisted I leave." Ashton rubbed his face with his hands. "I know, and it was a mistake." We sat in silence for a few minutes. I looked around the living room, noticing small changes. The pictures on the walls were different. My old books were off the shelves, replaced by glossy design and business books. It was no longer the home that Eleanor and I had created over the years. "Dad," Ashton broke the silence, "we need to sort out the finances. The mortgage payment is in 3 days. The utility bills are coming soon too. Of course, money comes first. Not how are you feeling or let's talk about what happened. Straight to the point." "I know the payment terms, Ashton," I replied. "After all, I've been paying them for the last 3 years. And we're very grateful for that," he hastened to add. "We are. It's just that the situation is critical right now." "Critical for whom?" I looked at my son carefully. "For you and Verity? Or for me?" Ashton looked puzzled. "For all of us. This is our home." "No, Ashton," I shook my head. "It's your home. You've reminded me of that many times yourself." "Technically, it's my home, remember?" He was embarrassed, but he quickly pulled himself together. "Yes, legally it's my house, but it's always been home to all of us, and you'll always be welcome here." "A guest," I repeated the word bitterly. "That's what I've become in my own home. A guest who could be kicked out when he got in the way." "Dad, please," Ashton leaned forward. "Let's not go back to that. We made a mistake, we admit it. But we need to move on." I nodded. I agreed. "And that's why I made the decision I did." Ashton tensed. "What decision?" "I'm selling the house." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Ashton's face stretched in surprise. "What? But you can't. The house is in my name." "That's true, but the mortgage is in my name. And according to the deed, I have the right to sell the house and pay off the rest of the mortgage, which I intend to do." Ashton looked at me with disbelief. "You can't do that. This is our house. This is where Verity and I plan to raise our children." "You don't have children yet," I reminded him. "And judging by your lifestyle, you're in no hurry to have them." "That's none of your business." Ashton raised his voice, then immediately lowered his tone. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is a big decision. We need to discuss it together." "We are," I shrugged. "Now, without Verity, she has a say. Like I had a say in deciding whether or not I should be at the party." I couldn't contain my sarcasm. "Or when my things were being moved into the former guest bedroom to make the master bedroom available to you." Ashton jumped up from the couch and started pacing the room. "That's blackmail, Dad. You're trying to punish us for one night." "No, Ashton," I remained calm. "This isn't punishment. It's a realization that we've gone our separate ways. You want to live your life, build a career, move up the social ladder, and I don't fit into that picture. I've become, a liability." "No, you haven't. It is, and we both know it," I sighed. "Look, I'm not angry. I don't blame you for wanting to live your own life. But I'm entitled to my own life too, and I don't want to be an unwanted guest in this house anymore. Ashton stopped and looked at me with despair. Where will you go? What are you going to do? Buy an apartment, I answered. A small one, but my own. Someplace where I'll feel at home. What about us? That question made me chuckle. You're a grown man, Ashton, a successful financial analyst. Verity makes good money too. You'll do fine. Without your financial support, we won't be able to pay the mortgage on this house. Ashton looked almost frightened. So we'll have to find a smaller place to live, I said. Or work more, or spend less on designers and fancy parties. At that moment, the front door opened, and we heard Verity's footsteps. She came into the living room, froze when she saw me, and then quickly crossed the room and to my surprise hugged me. Lloyd, you're back! Her voice sounded with exaggerated joy. We were so worried. I patted her back awkwardly, unaccustomed to such a display of affection on her part. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Verity stepped back, scrutinizing my face. Where have you been? We called every hospital, every hotel in town. At the Blue Pine Motel, I answered. And I'm fine. I just needed time to think. Verity cast a worried glance at Ashton, noticing the grim expression on his face. What's going on? Dad wants to sell the house, Ashton said dryly. Verity turned pale. What? But how? The house is in your name. I explained it to him. Ashton crossed his arms over his chest. He must have found a loophole in the deed. Not a loophole, but a standard clause, I corrected him. Since the mortgage is in my name, I have the right to initiate the sale by paying off the outstanding balance. Verity sank down on the couch, her businesslike attitude evaporating instantly. You can't do that, her voice sounded almost pleading. This is our house. We've put so much into it. You've put in designs and new furniture, I pointed out. I've invested 30 years of my life and most of my savings. This is payback for the party, isn't it? Verity's gaze turned hard. We apologized, Lloyd. What more do you want? I shook my head, surprised at how little they understood. This isn't revenge. It's a decision based on what's happened over the past 3 years, not just one party. The party was just the last straw. What are you talking about? Verity looked genuinely puzzled. We've been taking care of you all this time. Caring? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Verity, you've put up with me. You put up with me because I paid the bills. Because thanks to me, you were able to live in this house for almost nothing, saving your money and building a career. That's not true. She was outraged. We included you in our family, gave you a house after Eleanor died. Gave me a house? I raised my voice, something I hadn't done in a long time. This house was mine long before you came into the family, Verity. I let you live here, not the other way around. There was a heavy silence. Ashton stared at the floor, Verity at her hands. I felt strangely relieved that I'd finally said out loud what I'd been thinking all these years. We didn't mean for you to feel this way, Ashton finally said. Honestly, Dad, we thought we were doing you a favor by letting you live with us instead of you being alone. I know, my voice softened. I don't think you're evil people, Ashton. Just selfish, like most people are. So what now? Verity asked, raising her eyes to me. You're just going to throw us out on the street? Of course not, I shook my head. I'll give you time to find a new place to live. 3 months should be enough. 3 months? Ashton looked shocked. But we can't find something similar in that amount of time, not with our budget. Then we'll have to look for something less similar, I replied. After all, you both make good money. But not enough to afford a house like this, Verity bit her lip. Without your help, we can only afford an apartment, and that's not in the best neighborhood. Well, welcome to the real world, I said sarcastically. A world where people live within their means. Ashton suddenly knelt down in front of my chair, taking my hands in his. The gesture was so unexpected that I was confused. Dad, please, his voice trembled. Think about it again. We'll fix this, I promise. No more parties without you, no more disrespectful comments. You will be a full-fledged master in the house. I looked at my son, at his desperate face, and felt a strange mixture of love and disappointment. He was my child, flesh of my flesh, and at the same time, almost a stranger, a grown man who had made his own choices in life. Ashton, I carefully released my hands from his grip. This isn't about parties or comments. It's about us becoming strangers to each other. You're going your own way, and I don't fit in. And you know what? That's fine. Kids grow up, they have their own lives. But we can be a family, he insisted. A real family. We're family by blood, I agreed. We always will be. But that doesn't mean we have to live together, especially if it makes everyone unhappy. We're not unhappy, Verity interjected. We're just adjusting. 3 years is a long time to adjust, I pointed out. No, my decision is final. I'm selling the house, buying an apartment, and starting to live my life. And you're going to start living yours, without my financial support. But why now? Verity was almost screaming. Why not a year ago or a year from now? Because sometimes it takes a jolt to see the truth, I answered. This party, your behavior, it showed me what I'm really worth to you. And I decided that I deserved more. Ashton got up from his knees and returned to the couch, hugging Verity, who seemed to be on the verge of tears. How much? He asked suddenly. How much what? I didn't understand. How much do you want for the house? We could buy it from you. Take out a loan, borrow from Verity's parents. I shook my head. Ashton, you don't understand. It's not about the money. It's about me needing my own space, a home where I feel welcome. But you already own a house, he exclaimed. No, I shook my head firmly. Legally, you're the owner. And you never missed a chance to remind me of that. Ashton and Verity exchanged glances. I could see the thoughts racing through their heads, calculating their options, looking for a way out. What if we signed the house back over to you? Verity suggested. Then you'd be the rightful owner. What would that change? I asked. You'd still see me as a nuisance. You'll be waiting for me to pass away so you can have the house back. No, it won't work that way. You're saying terrible things, Verity whispered. I'm telling the truth, I replied. The truth we all know, but don't want to admit. We sat in silence for a while. I felt strangely calm, as if I'd let go of a heavy weight I'd been carrying around for years. Ashton looked lost. Verity looked angry and upset at the same time. Well, Ashton said at last, I guess we can't change your mind. No, I confirmed. No, I confirmed. You can't. And when do you plan to start the process? Verity's voice was filled with barely contained anger. I already have, I answered. I'm meeting with a realtor tomorrow. But like I said, you'll have 3 months to find a new place to live. That's generous, Verity murmured. Can we at least stay in touch? There was uncertainty in Ashton's voice. You are my father, after all. The question caught me off guard. I wasn't thinking of a complete breakup, just a distance, a division of finances and housing. Of course, I nodded. We'll always be family, Ashton. Just a different kind. He nodded, not looking me in the eye. I'm going to go upstairs, Verity said suddenly, standing up. I need to think. She left, leaving Ashton and me alone. He looked older, tired, as if he'd lived 10 years in those few days. Do you really think we treated you like a nuisance? He asked quietly. I sighed. Not always, no, but lately, yes. I was starting to feel unwelcome in my own home. The room that had once been a guest room, the old things tucked away in the attic, the photographs replaced with fashion prints. Little by little, you were erasing my presence from this house. Ashton was silent for a long moment, as if considering my words. I hadn't noticed it, he said at last. I really hadn't. But in retrospect, maybe you're right. That admission was unexpected. I didn't think Ashton was capable of such honesty. Thank you, I said, for at least admitting it. What can I do? He looked up at me. To make things right? Accept my decision, I said, and start building a life without my financial support. Become truly independent. Ashton nodded, though I could see that he was having a hard time accepting the idea. And then, we could have a relationship in a different way? I hope so, I answered sincerely. I hope so. 2 months. That's how long it took to sell the house. The realtor was pleasantly surprised by the condition of the property and the location, so she set the price higher than I expected. The neighborhood is prestigious. The schools nearby are good. The center is 15 minutes away. We'll take away quickly, she assured me. And so it was. The buyers were a young couple with 2 children. The husband worked as a surgeon, the wife as a professor at a local college. Nice people who valued the space and warmth of an old house more than the latest design trends. Ashton and Verity found an apartment in a new construction building on the eastern edge of Cedar City. Not what they were used to, but everything they could afford without my financial support. Verity hadn't spoken to me until the last day, communicating through Ashton or short notes left on the kitchen table. Ashton was more reserved in his disapproval, but I could see the resentment in his eyes every time we ran into each other in the hallway. I'd bought a small apartment on the west side of town, in a quiet neighborhood with mostly older residents. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a balcony overlooking a small park, a modern kitchen, everything a lonely old man needed. The apartment was on the second floor of a 3-story building built in the 70s but recently renovated. The day of the move was clear and cool. The November sun lit up the yellow leaves in the park across the street as the movers brought in my furniture. I took little, only the essentials and things dear to my heart. The chair Eleanor loved to sit in, our bed, the bookshelves of books we'd collected over the years, a few paintings, framed photographs. The rest was either left in the old house for the new owners, or I gave to charity. Ashton came over to help, even though I hadn't asked him to. He silently carried boxes, arranged furniture according to my instructions, hung pictures. We hardly spoke, but the tension of unspoken words hung in the air. When the movers were gone and the apartment was beginning to look more settled, Ashton finally broke the silence. "Nice place," he said, looking around the living room. "It's bright." "Yeah, I like it." I unfolded the books, arranging them on the shelves. "And there's a park across the street. I'll take a walk in the mornings." Ashton nodded, watching me with a strange expression on his face, a mixture of regret and bewilderment. "Dad," he began, clearly choosing his words. "Are you sure this is what you want? Living here, alone?" "I'm sure," I answered, still unpacking. I'd been living alone for the past 3 years, even though we were technically under the same roof. Ashton flinched as if he'd been slapped. "We weren't that detached." "We weren't?" I turned to him. "When was the last time we had dinner together? Not out of necessity, but because we wanted to spend time together? When was the last time you were interested in my life and not the bills I was paying?" He didn't answer, lowering his eyes. I sighed and went back to unpacking my books. There was no point in reopening old wounds. We'd both made a choice and now we had to live with the consequences. "Look," I said softer, "I don't blame you. You're living your life and that's okay. I just realized that I want to live mine too." "Without us," Ashton added bitterly. "Not without you," I shook my head. "Just without the role I played in your house. The role of the invisible ATM machine, the one that was best kept in the back room so it wouldn't get in the way." Ashton wanted to object, but changed his mind. Instead, he went to the window and stared out at the park for a long time. "It's a beautiful view," he said at last. "You'll like it here in the spring, when the trees are green." "I hope so," I smiled. "I plan to get to know the neighbors, maybe even get a dog. Always wanted a dog, but Verity was against it." Ashton turned to me in surprise. "Really? I didn't know you liked dogs." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I shrugged. "Like I don't know about you, I guess. We'd become strangers over the years." Pain flashed in his eyes, and for a second I felt a pang of guilt. But then I reminded myself that I was telling the truth. We really are estranged, and to pretend otherwise is to continue living a lie. "Could we, start over?" Ashton suggested tentatively. "Get to know each other again?" I looked at my son carefully, trying to understand the sincerity of his suggestion. "Why would you do that, Ashton? Now that I'm no longer funding your life?" He flared up. "Not everything revolves around money, Dad. For the last 3 years of our lives, it did." Ashton couldn't come up with an answer. He helped me finish unpacking, and soon the apartment began to take on a finished look. Not as spacious as the old house, but more mine. Every piece here had been chosen by me. Every painting hung where I wanted it, without regard for anyone else's opinion on current design trends. When Ashton was about to leave, he stomped awkwardly to the door, as if he wanted to say something important, but didn't dare. "Dad," he finally said, "about the money from the sale of the house." And here was the real reason for his visit. I'd been waiting to talk to him about it from the moment he showed up on the doorstep. "What about them?" I asked in a neutral tone. "Well, legally, the house was mine, so—" "Legally, yes," I nodded. "But the mortgage was mine, and I'd made all the payments for the last 30 years. So the money from the sale, minus the mortgage balance, was mine too." Ashton looked disappointed, but not surprised. "I just thought you might want to help us with the down payment on the new apartment. It's smaller than we're used to, and the neighborhood isn't exactly upscale. You both have good jobs," I reminded you. "You can handle it." But it would be easier with your help, Ashton insisted. It would be fair, considering the house was in my name. Fair? I couldn't hold back a chuckle. You gotta live in a big house in a nice neighborhood for almost free for 3 years. I'd say that's more than fair. Ashton pressed his lips together, clearly unhappy with my answer. You've changed, Dad. You've gotten tougher. No, I shook my head. I just stopped letting myself be used. There's a difference. He left shortly afterward, leaving me alone in my new apartment. I sat in Eleanor's chair, looking at the park outside the window and feeling strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I was really alone, and it didn't scare me. On the contrary, I felt free. Freedom from expectations, from silent demands, from the role I had played for years. The first weeks in the new apartment, I was settling in and getting used to the new rhythm of life. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the waking park, walking around the neighborhood, getting to know my neighbors, going to the little cafe on the corner that served great pancakes on Tuesdays. I felt like a tourist in my own city, discovering places I didn't even know existed while living in my upscale neighborhood. Ashton called once a week, the conversations short and awkward. He asked how I was settling in, if I needed help, if I was lonely. I answered politely, but with restraint. Verity didn't call at all. About a month after I moved in, Ashton arrived unannounced. I had just gotten back from a walk and was making dinner when the doorbell rang. Hi, Dad, he smiled tentatively. I was in the neighborhood for work and thought I'd stop by. Is that okay with you? I invited him in, offering him coffee. Ashton sat at the kitchen table watching me cook. He looked tired, with circles under his eyes. How are things going at the new place? I asked, setting the cup in front of him. It's okay, he shrugged. The apartment's small, but it's clean. Verity still couldn't get used to hearing the neighbors upstairs. I nodded, imagining Verity cringing at every footstep overhead. She'd always been sensitive to noise. How's work going? Ashton sighed. Not great. Willis didn't offer a partnership, said I wasn't ready yet. I felt a pang of regret. Despite our differences, Ashton was still my son, and his failures didn't make me happy. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. You were so close. Yeah, he twirled the cup in his hands. The party was the key moment, and it had gone wrong. I waited for accusations, for hints that my leaving and the subsequent blocking of accounts was the reason for his failure. But Ashton was silent, just drinking coffee and staring out the window. Dad, he finally said, I need your help. What kind of help? I tensed, expecting to talk about money. Financial, he didn't beat around the bush. We're in trouble. Verity got laid off at work, and my paycheck is barely enough to pay the rent and bills. We're living in the minus every month. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Ashton, we've talked about this. You're a grown man. You have to provide for your family. I know. He ran a hand through his hair nervously. And I'm trying, but it's just a tough time right now. If you could borrow some, I'll pay you back when things stabilize. I looked at my son, at his worried face, and felt conflicting emotions. On the one hand, my natural parental instinct was to help, to protect, to provide. On the other, I realized that if I started funding his life again, nothing would change. Ashton would never learn self-sufficiency. How much are you asking? I asked. $5,000 to start, he answered, to cover the credit card debt and even out the budget a little. And then? Ashton hesitated. Well, maybe a little more until Verity finds a new job. I nodded, realizing this was just the beginning. If I gave $5,000 now, there'd be another request in a month, then another, and soon we'd be back to the same pattern I was trying to get away from. No, I said firmly. I'm not giving you the money, Ashton. His face contorted with hurt and anger. Really? You're sitting on a pile of money from selling your house, living in this little apartment, spending the minimum, and you can't help your own son? It's not about whether I can, I remained calm. It's about whether I should. And the answer is no, you don't. You created this situation when you used to live beyond your means, counting on my support. You're my father, Ashton exclaimed. Parents help their children. Yes, they do, I agreed. But they don't support them all their lives. You're 45, Ashton. It's time you learned to live on your own. He stood up, his face red with anger. You're just getting back at us. For that party, for asking you to go away for one night. No, I stood up too. I'm not getting revenge. I'm teaching you an important lesson I should have taught you years ago. What lesson? He was almost shouting. That actions have consequences, I replied. That you can't treat people like ATMs and then expect them to be happy to help. That respect must be earned, not bought. Ashton looked at me with disbelief and resentment. I thought you loved me. I do, my voice softened. That's why I'm not giving you money. Because I know that as long as you're financially supported, you'll never be truly self-sufficient. He shook his head, clearly not accepting what I was saying. You've changed, Dad. You've become cold. No, I sighed. I just stopped letting myself be used. And if that sounds like coldness, well, so be it. Ashton left, slamming the door. I knew he wouldn't understand my decision now. Probably never would. But I was sure I was doing the right thing. After that visit, Ashton stopped calling. Weeks went by, Christmas was approaching, and there was no word from my son. I didn't call myself, deciding to give him time to cool down and realize the situation. Instead, I focused on my new life. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community center. I had always wanted to paint, but never found the time. Now retired, with an independent financial situation, I could afford this small luxury. Our instructor, Iris North, was an energetic woman of about 60, with short gray hair and bright eyes. She treated creativity with humor and passion, infecting everyone with her enthusiasm. "Lloyd, you're stiff," she said, watching my tentative strokes. "Let go of your hand. Let the paint flow. Watercolor loves freedom." Gradually, I began to grasp the technique, and although my work was far from perfect, the process of painting was satisfying. There were 8 people in the group, all around my age, and we quickly became friends. After class, we often went to a cafe nearby, discussing painting, books, movies, everything except health problems and messy children. It was an unspoken rule of our little company. One evening, when everyone had gone, Iris offered to walk me home. "You've got talent, Lloyd," she said as we walked through the evening park. "But you're still afraid of making mistakes, just like in life, right?" I looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean by that?" "Just an observation," she smiled. "You seem like a person who's always done what you should do, not what you want to do. And you're just now starting to discover a different side of life." Her words hit the mark. All my life I'd really followed the rules, worked hard, provided for my family, been dependable and predictable. It was only now at 78 that I dared to live my own way. "Maybe you're right," I admitted. "But better late than never, right?" "Absolutely," she laughed, and her laugh reminded me of Eleanor. Different in sound, but just as sincere and warm. "And you know what? You're doing great for a rookie." Over dinner at a little restaurant on a street corner, we talked about life, about creativity, about the importance of not being afraid to start new things, even when everyone around you thinks you're too old for change. "Age is just a number," Iris said, raising her glass of wine. "It's how you feel inside that matters." I raised my glass, clinking it with hers. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," she echoed. That night on my way home, I felt a strange feeling, like life was just beginning, despite my advanced age. As if everything that had gone before work, marriage, raising my son, was just a prelude to something new, something that belonged only to me. At Christmas, I got a card from Ashton, short, formal, but still, a sign that he didn't want a complete breakup. I sent him a gift, a book on financial literacy, a little irony that I hope he appreciated, and an invitation to lunch whenever he wanted. He didn't show up for Christmas or New Year's, but he called in mid-January, voice sounding calmer than the last time we met. "Just wanted to see how you were doing," he said. "Thanks for the present." "Was the book useful?" I asked with a slight smile. "Actually, it did," he said, not resentment in his voice, more of an acknowledgement. Verity and I had a serious conversation about finances. We made a budget, cut back on expenses. She found a new job, not as prestigious, but stable. "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "I was thinking about what you said last time," Ashton continued after a pause, "about how I'll never be self-sufficient as long as you keep funding me. And you know, you might be right." That admission cost him an obvious effort, and I appreciated his honesty. "Thank you, son. That means a lot to me." We talked for a while longer, not about money, not about past hurts, but about simple things, about his work, about my painting lessons, about the new movie we'd both seen. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but the beginning of something new, something healthier. In the spring, I often sat on my balcony, painting the trees blossoming in the park. Iris stopped by 2 or 3 times a week, first to appraise my work, then just to talk and drink tea. We became friends, perhaps something more, though neither of us was in a hurry to define our relationship. Ashton arrived in April, when the whole park was in bloom. He looked better, calmer, more confident. We drank coffee on the balcony, talking about his work, about how he and Verity were adjusting to their new life. "You know," he said, looking at my watercolors on the living room wall, "I've never seen you so happy, not even when Mom was alive." I thought about what he said. Was I happy with Eleanor? Yes, no doubt. But that had been a different kind of happiness, quiet, familiar, based on compromise and shared decisions. What I felt now was more acute, more vivid, the happiness of discovery, of freedom, of new possibilities. "Just another stage of life," I answered, "with other joys." Ashton nodded, understanding more than I was saying out loud. "I'm happy for you, Dad. I really am." And I believed him. For the first time in a long time, I felt sincerity in my son's words. Not calculation, not ulterior motives, but real feeling. We're not as close as we used to be, and we probably never will be. Too much water had passed. Too many resentments had accumulated. But we were moving in the right direction, slowly finding a new format for the relationship. No financial dependence, no hidden grudges, just two adults bound by blood and a shared past. As Ashton was leaving, he hugged me, for the first time in years. Awkward, quick, but sincere. "Come back next week if you have time," I said. Iris promised to make her special apple pie. "Iris?" He raised his eyebrows. "The art teacher you told me about?" "She is." I couldn't help but smile. Ashton shook his head, not with judgment but with surprise. 78 years old and still full of surprises, he smiled. "I'll be there. I want to meet the woman who made my father paint watercolors." After he left, I sat on the balcony for a long time, looking at the blooming park. Life didn't end at 78. It had simply taken on a new form, freer, more authentic. I was no longer someone's father or husband in the first place. I was just Lloyd Hudspert, a man who loved watercolors, morning walks, and apple pies. A man who had finally found the courage to be himself. There was an unknown future ahead, a relationship with Ashton that could develop into something new or remain formal. A friendship with Iris that could grow into something more or remain a warm affection between two lonely people. New hobbies, new acquaintances, new places. I didn't know what the next few years would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I looked to the future not with anxiety or tired humility, but with cautious optimism, with a sense that the best part of life might still be ahead of me.